The first thing that broke him was not the coins themselves, but the way her hands trembled as she counted them, carefully, lovingly, as if each small piece of metal carried a memory she was afraid to drop. The cafe was warm, bright, and full of soft background noise that most people barely noticed. Coffee machines hissed, chairs scraped gently against the floor, and quiet conversations floated through the air like something harmless. To everyone else, it was just another morning in a clean, modern place somewhere in the United States. But for the man sitting alone near the window, this moment would split something open inside him that had been closed for years. Nathaniel Brooks had not come here for breakfast. He rarely did. He came here when his office felt too empty and his penthouse felt too silent. As the CEO of a fast-growing technology company, his life was full of meetings, numbers, and applause, yet painfully empty of meaning. He told himself he liked watching people live ordinary lives. In truth, he was trying to remember how that felt. That was when he noticed the girl. She stood at the counter with a small smile that never quite left her face, even as the barista leaned forward with visible impatience. She was maybe 12 years old, thin, with neatly brushed hair and a faded jacket that looked one size too small. In her open palms lay a collection of coins, carefully sorted by size. Her eyes moved between the coins and the woman behind the counter, reading lips with intense focus. Something about the way she smiled felt different. It was not the confident smile of a child who felt safe. It was the practiced smile of someone who had learned early that the world softened more easily when you appeared grateful for very little. Nathaniel watched as the barista spoke again. Slower this time, her mouth exaggerating words. The girl nodded quickly, then shook her head, then nodded again. Confusion flickering across her face. She pushed the coins forward, her smile widening, her shoulders lifting in a hopeful posture. What if this were your child? He wondered. What if you knew she was standing there alone, trying to make sense of a world that rarely slowed down for her? The barista sighed and looked away, clearly annoyed. Nathaniel felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen this look before. He had given it himself, years ago, to people who did not fit neatly into his schedule or expectations. The girl turned slightly, perhaps sensing the tension, and that was when Nathaniel saw the small hearing device tucked behind her ear. The realization landed heavily. She was deaf, or nearly so, navigating a noisy world with quiet determination. Her fingers closed gently around the remaining coins as the barista slid a small paper cup toward her, half filled. The girl beamed, nodding repeatedly in thanks, bowing her head in a way that suggested she had learned gratitude as a survival skill. She took the cup with both hands as if it were something precious. Nathaniel could not look away. His coffee sat untouched, growing cold. The girl moved to a small table near the window and sat alone. She took careful sips, eyes closing briefly with each one, as if savoring not just the taste, but the comfort. A few coins remained on the table. She stared at them for a long moment, then pushed them back into her pocket, her smile dimming just a little. Gradually, the story around her began to form in Nathaniel's mind. He saw a small apartment, maybe shared with a tired parent. He saw early mornings and long walks. He saw a life where every dollar mattered and every kindness felt enormous. And for the first time in a long while, he felt ashamed of how little he had noticed people like her. Nathaniel had grown up poor once. Not this kind of poor, he told himself. Not counting coins poor. But poor enough to remember hunger and silence and the feeling of being invisible. Somewhere along the way, success had erased that memory, replacing it with steel and glass and distance. The girl finished her drink and stood, carefully throwing the cup away. As she turned, her eyes met Nathaniel's for a brief moment. She smiled at him, not because she wanted anything, not because she expected help, just because smiling was how she met the world. That smile broke him completely. His throat tightened, and he pressed his hand against his chest, surprised by the sudden burn behind his eyes. He felt foolish, overwhelmed by a moment most people would forget before reaching their cars. But he knew something irreversible had happened. He watched as the girl walked toward the door, her small figure framed by sunlight. Before she could leave, Nathaniel stood abruptly, nearly knocking his chair back. People glanced at him, startled, but he did not care. He moved quickly, gently placing himself between the girl and the door. He did not speak. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, then stopped. The gesture suddenly felt wrong. Too easy. Too clean. He took a breath and knelt slightly so they were closer to eye level. Slowly, carefully, he pointed to her cup, then to the coins, then opened his hands and shook his head softly. He smiled, not the polite smile of a businessman, but something uncertain and human. The girl tilted her head, studying him. Her eyes flicked to his hands, then to his face. After a moment, she nodded slowly. Her smile returned, brighter now, and she placed her hand briefly over her heart, a universal sign of thanks. Nathaniel stood aside and watched her leave. The bell above the door chimed softly, and then she was gone. He returned to his table, but the cafe no longer felt the same. The noise felt louder. The warmth felt heavier. He stared at his untouched coffee and realized he did not want it anymore. That afternoon, Nathaniel canceled his remaining meetings. He drove without a destination, thoughts spiraling. He thought about his company, about profits and expansion and press releases. He thought about the girl and her coins. And for the first time in years, he asked himself a question that had nothing to do with success. What am I actually doing with my life? Over the next weeks, something shifted. Nathaniel found himself paying attention in new ways. He noticed the janitor who worked late nights. He noticed the intern who ate lunch alone. He noticed how often people were rushed past, ignored, unheard. He began quietly funding accessibility programs, not as charity headlines, but as necessities. He supported schools for children with hearing impairments. He mandated inclusive design in every product his company touched, not because it looked good, but because it felt right. Still, the girl stayed with him. He returned to the cafe often, at the same time, sitting at the same table. Days passed, then weeks. He wondered about her name, her life, whether she was okay. He never saw her again, and somehow that felt appropriate. She had not been sent to stay in his life. She had come to change it. Months later, during a visit to a small community center his company had begun supporting, Nathaniel saw her again. She was standing with a woman who looked tired but strong, signing animatedly, laughter lighting up both their faces. The girl noticed him first. Her eyes widened in recognition, and then she smiled. That same quiet, resilient smile. Nathaniel felt his breath catch. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. The girl mirrored the gesture, then reached up to hold the woman's hand. They walked past him, their presence brief but powerful. Nathaniel stood there long after they were gone, surrounded by the hum of people and possibility. He understood then that kindness did not always need to be acknowledged to be real. Sometimes, it just needed to be chosen. That night, alone in his apartment, Nathaniel sat by the window and watched the city lights. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full of meaning. If you had been there, watching that small girl count her coins with shaking hands, what would you have done? Would you have looked away? Or would you have allowed your heart to break just enough to change? Before this story ends, take a moment and share in the comments what this moment made you feel. Or if you have ever witnessed a quiet act of kindness that stayed with you. And if this story truly touched your heart, gently consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. So more stories like this can remind us all that sometimes a smile and a few coins can change a life forever.